The 38th floor of the Voss Analytics building belonged to people who had never worried about making rent. Marcus Jenkins could feel the difference the moment those elevator doors opened. The air smelled different up here, expensive, filtered, cold. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the city sprawled below like something meant to be owned rather than lived in. The carpet was the kind that cost more per square foot than his monthly electricity bill. The lighting was designed to make everyone look powerful. He definitely did not look powerful in his work jeans and faded Carhartt jacket. It was 11 p.m. on a Thursday and the building was nearly empty. That's when they called him in. When something broke and the important people needed it fixed quietly, without interruption. The electrical junction on the 38th floor had sparked during a board presentation. Nobody had been hurt. Nothing had burned. But the CEO's office was now without proper lighting, and apparently that was an emergency that couldn't wait until morning. Marcus carried his toolbox across the polished floor with the hyper-awareness of a man in the wrong place. His boots made small sounds against the marble. He tried to make them smaller. The conference room was lit by hurricane lamps. The glow was soft, amber, almost intimate, which was ironic given that it illuminated the wreckage of what looked like a salvage operation. Budget presentations scattered across the table like casualties of war. 2 laptop screens showing error messages, printed documents in organized chaos, strategy decks, client notes, financial projections. Someone had been here for hours trying to rebuild something that kept falling apart. That someone was Victoria Hayes. She didn't look up when he entered. Her focus was complete. Absolute. The kind of focus that came from exhaustion so deep it had crystallized into something like meditation. She was 31. Maybe 32. With dark hair pulled back in a way that suggested it had been pulled back 12 hours ago and never released. Her blazer was expensive, tailored, the kind of thing that probably cost what Marcus made in 3 weeks. It hung over the back of her chair like she'd shed it hours ago in some quiet moment of frustration. She wore dress slacks and a silk blouse, and even from across the room Marcus could see the careful precision of someone trying to hold themselves together through sheer will. She had been working for 14 hours straight. Electrical panel? Marcus said quietly, not wanting to startle her. Where's the main junction? Victoria glanced up briefly, assessed him with the efficiency of someone who'd trained herself to process information quickly, and returned to focus. Service closet. 3rd door on the left. There was some kind of surge. She returned to her work. Marcus noticed her fingers were shaking slightly as she typed. He found the junction box, assessed the problem, and got to work. The surge had blown a breaker. Nothing catastrophic. 20 minutes to fix. Maybe 30 if he was being thorough. But he stayed longer. He lingered over the diagnostics, rechecked connections that didn't need rechecking, made himself useful in the way that maintenance workers do. Invisible, competent, present without demanding to be noticed. 3 hours passed. And over that time, Marcus became aware of things about Victoria that he probably wasn't supposed to notice. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear every time she was concentrating on something difficult. The small sound she made when she finally got a section of the presentation to cooperate. Not quite triumph, more like relief. The fact that she'd asked the junior associate 3 times if he wanted to go home. And when he finally left around 10 p.m., she'd said thank you like she meant it. Like she understood both his work and the sacrifice of his evening. She cared about people, he realized, genuinely, not as a management technique, as a human being. Marcus noticed things like that. He'd trained himself to. In a working-class life, survival sometimes depended on reading people accurately, knowing who would help and who would hurt, who saw you as human and who saw you as a problem to be solved. Victoria saw people. At 11:47 p.m., the last client notes were recovered. The presentation was rebuilt. Everything was saved. Victoria sat back in her chair and allowed herself exactly 1 moment of rest, her head tilted back, eyes closed, taking a breath like she was surfacing from deep water. She opened her eyes and looked at Marcus. "Thank you," she said, "for staying. For fixing it quietly." "That's the job," he replied. She nodded. Understanding that he meant more than just the electrical work. The job was also to not make things harder, to not ask questions, to disappear after finishing. Marcus packed his tools. He was almost to the door when Victoria's voice caught him. "Marcus, right? I've seen you around the building." He turned back, surprised she knew his name. "Yeah, Marcus Jenkins. I'm on the maintenance crew." She acknowledged this with a slight nod, as if confirming something she already knew. "I'm Victoria Hayes. I work in systems architecture." The introduction felt like more than an introduction. It felt like an offering. He nodded, unsure how to respond. The bridge between their worlds was visible in the fluorescent lighting. Her expensive blazer, his work jeans, her office view, his service closet. These were not people who exchanged personal introductions at the end of a work night, but they had. Marcus drove home through the city with the radio playing a country station he barely tolerated but never changed. He climbed the stairs to his apartment. 3rd floor, no elevator. The building held together by hope and the landlord's indifference. He paused in his daughter's doorway and looked at Zara sleeping on her stomach. One small arm wrapped around a stuffed rabbit missing one ear. She was 8 years old. She had no idea how precarious everything was, how one missed payment, one emergency repair, one job loss away from instability. He kept it that way intentionally, kept her world small and safe and contained. He'd gotten very good at keeping things small. Chapter 2, the moment that changes everything. 3 weeks later, Marcus was called back to the 38th floor. The presentation had failed. Spectacularly. The client had found holes in the strategy. Budget numbers didn't align. Projections were based on faulty data. The whole thing needed to be rebuilt from scratch, and it needed to be done by tomorrow morning. 12 hours away. Victoria had been working since noon. It was now 11:30 p.m., and she was still there. Still focused. Still somehow maintaining that quality of composed determination that seemed to be her default operating state. But something was different this time. There was a bottle of water on the desk beside her laptop. Empty. The wrapper from a protein bar. Consumed hours ago. The faint shadow under her eyes that came from not sleeping. From the weight of having failed and having to rebuild. And there was something else. Something in the way she moved. The way she held herself. Not collapse. But the holding on that comes right before collapse. Marcus worked quietly, professionally, without conversation. He fixed the lighting issue more completely this time. Installed backup circuitry, made sure there would be no failures, but he stayed. He was in the conference room at midnight, reading through a technical document he'd brought when Victoria finally stopped typing. She sat back, scrubbed her hands over her face, laughed, a short, exhausted sound that was almost a sob. There has to be an easier way to live than this, she said. It wasn't directed at him. She wasn't even looking at him, but the words hung in the air like something physical. That sounds like the beginning of a terrible idea, Marcus replied, almost without thinking. It was a safe response, the kind of joke that allowed them both to acknowledge that her life, his presence, this midnight moment, all of it was absurd. Victoria looked at him then, really looked at him, and something shifted. Marcus wasn't sure what he was going to say. The words came out before he'd decided to speak them, before he'd measured them or considered consequences. Marry me! The silence that followed was complete. The building held its breath. The city outside the windows stopped moving. Victoria stared at him. Not shocked exactly. Something more complicated. Her expression cycled through several emotions. Surprise, then understanding, then something that looked like sadness, then clarity. When she finally spoke, her voice was very quiet. I've been waiting for you to say that for years. The words landed like stones. Marcus couldn't speak. The conference room seemed to shrink. The weight of what she'd just said pressed down on him like something physical. She wasn't joking. She wasn't playing. She was telling him something that had been true for a long time. Something she'd been carrying. Something that had been building beneath the surface of their careful, professional distance. She had been waiting. 3 years, he would later learn. 3 years of watching him pick up his daughter from school on the rare afternoon he had that shift. 3 years of noticing the way he treated people. Maintenance workers, junior staff, cleaning crew, with a respect that most executives passed over. 3 years of seeing him in the break room and understanding without ever having been told that he was carrying something heavy. 3 years of knowing somehow that underneath his careful restraint and his maintained distance, there was something worth waiting for. Victoria stood and gathered her laptop with deliberate movements, not angry movements. Something more measured. She was making a decision, Marcus realized, with each careful action. You don't have to say anything tonight, she said. She slid her computer into her bag. Actually, it's probably better if you don't. She picked up her blazer. She was leaving, and she was doing it with a kind of grace that made it clear she'd thought about this moment before. Not with romantic fantasy, but with practical consideration. I mean it, she continued. Not because I want an answer I have to drag out of you, and not because I think you owe me one after a bad joke and a late night. She turned to face him directly. I'm tired of pretending I didn't hear something I've wanted to hear for a very long time. So just go home, think, and when you figure out what you actually want, not what feels safe, not what's good for Zara, but what you actually want, you tell me. The mention of his daughter's name hit him like a physical shock. She knew about Zara. Of course she did. He'd mentioned his daughter in passing weeks ago. Not thinking Victoria would be listening closely enough to remember. She had been listening. But Victoria, she shook her head gently. Not sharply, just enough to stop him. Not tonight, not like this. If you're going to choose me, you do it clearly. Not because you're lonely, not because Zara needs a mother figure, not because I've been convenient. You choose me because you actually see me, because you understand what I'm asking for, because you're willing to be different than you've been. She grabbed her purse and headed for the door, then she paused and looked back at him one more time. There's something else you should know. Something I'll tell you when you're ready to listen. But not tonight. Then she was gone, leaving Marcus alone in the conference room with the broken presentation, the scattered papers, and the impossible sentence. I've been waiting for you to say that for years. He heard it all the way to the parking garage. He heard it driving home through streets washed silver by midnight traffic lights. He heard it climbing the stairs to his apartment. He heard it when he paused in Zara's doorway and looked at his daughter sleeping on her stomach, one small arm wrapped around a stuffed rabbit with a missing ear. He had bought that rabbit when Zara was 3. It had been through everything with her. Every fear, every nightmare, every moment when the world felt too big and too unstable. She dragged it everywhere because it was the one thing she was sure about, the one thing she could rely on to stay. Marcus understood in that moment what he had been doing for 7 years. Chapter 3. The architecture of his fear. Marcus couldn't sleep that night. He sat on the edge of Zara's bed and looked at his daughter sleeping. Really looked at her. The way her small body was arranged in complete peace. The way her hand rested on the rabbit. The slow rise and fall of her breathing. She was 8 years old. Born when he was 25. When he still thought the world made sense. When he still believed that if you worked hard and did things right, everything would turn out okay. When he still believed in the architecture of stability. Her mother's name was Rachel. They'd met in his old life. The one that felt like it belonged to someone else. He'd been doing structural engineering work in Pittsburgh then, making real money. Working on projects that actually mattered. Bridge rehabilitations, building systems, the kind of work that required precision and knowledge and skill. Rachel had been a paralegal. Smart, ambitious, the kind of woman who had her life planned out in 5-year increments. They'd gotten married, they'd had Zara, and for about 14 months Marcus had been happy. Then Rachel had left. She'd done it kindly, which somehow made it worse. She hadn't blamed him for anything. She'd simply explained with the clarity of someone who had thought about this decision for a long time, that she couldn't be married to a man who seemed to live like disappointment was always coming. A man who made good money but spent it like it could disappear at any moment. A man who loved his daughter with an intensity that left no room for anyone else. You need her to be everything, Rachel had said when they did the difficult work of separating their lives. You need one person you're sure about, but I can't be that person for you, Marcus. And I can't be less important than a child. That's not how love works. She'd taken a job in Atlanta. She'd been kind about custody. She'd wanted Zara to visit, wanted to be in her life, but she'd stepped into another world, one that didn't include Marcus. After that, Marcus had rebuilt himself. He'd quit Pittsburgh, sold the apartment, left the trajectory that was supposed to define his life. He'd moved to Holt County with Zara and found work as an electrician, contract work, side jobs. The kind of employment that didn't require references or long-term commitment. He'd bought the house with nearly everything he had saved. Buying time instead of stability. And he'd built walls. Walls around himself. Walls around Zara. Walls that said nobody matters enough to be disappointed about. Nobody matters enough to risk having leave. He'd spent 7 years keeping things small. Work that paid the bills. A daughter who needed him. A routine that didn't vary. No relationships that could become complicated. No hope that relied on someone else. No connections that went deeper than surface-level courtesy. He'd told himself it was protection. Sitting on Zara's bed at 2 a.m., Marcus understood what it actually was. It was a cage. Not something keeping danger out. Something keeping life in. Something that had seemed necessary and prudent and wise, but had actually been just another word for fear. He'd been so terrified of loss, of Zara being hurt, of someone leaving again, that he'd chosen to leave first. Chosen to step away from anything that could actually matter. Chosen to live like the only person in the world he could trust was the one person who was legally required to stay. And Zara, without him ever saying it out loud, had internalized this. She'd learned that intimacy meant risk. That people leaving was the natural state of things. That the safest life was the smallest life. He was teaching his daughter to be afraid. Victoria, meanwhile, had been watching. She'd been watching him pick up Zara from school. She'd been watching him in the break room. Quiet, careful, never taking more than he was offered. She'd been watching him do his job with complete competence and zero expectation of recognition. She'd been watching him build a cage and call it a home. And she'd been waiting. Waiting for what? For him to crack. For him to admit that he was tired. For him to acknowledge that the life he'd built, while safe, was not a life at all. It was a holding pattern. A pause that had become permanent. Marcus stood and left Zara's room. He went to the kitchen and poured himself a glass of water. He stood at the window and looked out at the dark street, the quiet neighborhood, the life he'd constructed with such careful intention. It was a good life in many ways. Zara was safe. She was happy. She had a father who showed up every day and did the work and never left her wondering whether she mattered. But it was also a life built on fear. And fear, Marcus was beginning to understand, was not actually a good foundation for anything. It was 4 a.m. when he finally admitted what he actually wanted. He wanted Victoria to be right. He wanted what she was asking for to be possible. He wanted to be the kind of man who could choose something bigger than his fear. He wanted to look at his daughter and teach her that love wasn't a liability, that connection wasn't a weakness, that the smallest life, the safest life, was actually the most dangerous life of all. But wanting it and being able to do it were two very different things. Chapter 4. Her Power Revealed. Marcus didn't see Victoria for 3 days. He worked his shifts. He picked up Zara from school. He made dinner, helped with homework, maintained the careful structure of their contained life. He didn't go to the 38th floor. There was no reason to. No electrical emergency. No excuse to be in that world. He thought about her constantly. On the 3rd day, he got a text from an unknown number. "We need to talk. Coffee? My place. 6 p.m. Here's the address." His heart did something complicated in his chest. He dropped Zara with Mrs. Chen, the older woman who lived downstairs and watched her sometimes when he had evening jobs. He told Zara he had a work call. He told her not to stay up late. He told her to be good, which was what he always told her, which was what she always was. Victoria's apartment was in the kind of building that cost money. Real money. The kind that said, "I have my life together. I have a plan. I have security." The elevator was smooth and quiet. The hallway smelled like money too. Expensive candles, careful maintenance, the faint sound of people living lives of intention. She answered the door on the first knock. She was wearing casual clothes. Jeans, a sweater, no blazer, no armor. Her hair was down. She looked younger this way, less composed, more human, and also more dangerous somehow. The things that made her seem less professional were the exact things that made her seem more real. "Hi," she said simply. "Hi," he replied. She stepped aside and let him in. Her apartment was exactly what he'd expected and nothing like he'd imagined. It was small, lived in, filled with books and plants and evidence of actual personhood rather than decoration. The view was significant, a city skyline, lights, the sense of being somewhere that mattered. But the space itself was warm in a way that suggested Victoria was less interested in impressing people than in creating a place where she could think. "Sit," she said, gesturing to the couch. He sat. She sat next to him, but not close. There was space between them. Carefully maintained distance. "I want to be clear about something," Victoria began, and he could hear the decision in her voice. The product of 3 days of thought, of knowing exactly what she needed to say. "When I told you I've been waiting for years, I wasn't asking for your pity. I wasn't asking for you to feel bad about me standing on the edge of your life." Marcus opened his mouth to speak, but she held up a hand. "Let me finish. 3 years ago, I made a decision. Not unconsciously, not without understanding the cost. I decided that there was something in you worth waiting for, something underneath all the fear and control and careful distance, and I was willing to wait and see if I was right about that." She paused, letting that land. "I was right, I know you. I've watched you long enough to know who you actually are, Marcus, and I'm still waiting. But I need to be clear, I'm not waiting forever." "Victoria," she held up her hand again. "I'm not finished. If you're going to choose me, there are conditions, non-negotiable ones." She stood up and walked to the window. The city sprawled below her. Indifferent to this conversation that was changing Marcus's life. "First," she said, "I need you to choose clearly. Not because you're lonely, not because your life is small and you want to expand it with something convenient, not because I'm around and available and it's easier than being alone. You choose me because you actually see me, because you understand what I'm worth, because you're willing to do the work of being with someone who isn't going to make it easy for you." She turned to face him. "Second, Zara is part of this. I'm not a girlfriend who comes and goes. I'm not something you try on to see if it fits. If we do this, we do it honestly. She knows about me. She understands what's happening. I'm not going to suddenly appear in her life 3 months from now like some kind of surprise. Victoria, she's only 8. "Exactly," Victoria replied, "so she deserves to understand what's happening to her life. Not being protected from reality, being told the truth." She returned to the couch but remained standing. "Third, you need to understand that I have my own life. I have my own career. I have my own trajectory. If you choose me, you're choosing all of that, not asking me to downsize myself to fit into your life. Building something bigger that includes what matters to both of us." She looked directly at him. "And fourth, the hardest one, you need to be willing to actually let me in. Not the careful, controlled version of yourself that you show everyone. The actual you. The scared part. The part that's tired. The part that wants something more than survival. I need that version of you, Marcus. I need you to trust me enough to stop managing everything." The apartment was very quiet. "So here's what happens now," Victoria continued. "You go home. You think about this. You sit with it, and then you decide. Do you actually want this, or do you want to stay safe?" "I know which one I want," Marcus said quietly. "I don't care what you want today," Victoria replied, and her voice was kind but absolute. "I need to see what you do tomorrow. And the day after that, I need to see you actually change, not just say you will." She walked him to the door. "Until then, we're just 2 people who work in the same building. Nothing more, nothing less." She closed the door behind him. And Marcus stood in the hallway for a long moment, understanding that everything had shifted. That he'd been given a choice and an opportunity, and a clear set of conditions for what came next. He'd also been given an ultimatum. Dressed up in the language of honesty and self-respect, Victoria Hayes was not going to wait forever. Part 2. Early Conflict. Chapter 5. The next morning, new pressure arrives. Marcus barely slept. He lay in bed replaying the conversation, understanding each of Victoria's conditions with crystallizing clarity. By the time his alarm went off at 6 a.m., he'd already accepted several truths. He didn't know how to do what she was asking. He didn't know how to choose something bigger than his fear. He didn't know how to let someone in, but he wanted to learn. He moved through his morning routine with Zara on autopilot. Shower, coffee, waffles in the toaster, her dinosaur lunchbox, the one she'd insisted she'd outgrown 3 months ago, but still refused to replace because, secretly, she loved it. He packed her lunch with the same care he put into everything. Precise, functional, loving in the way that only showed through actions and not words. At 6:14 a.m., his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Hope Lily remembered her library book and the blue folder. It was on the couch last night. V. His hands actually shook a little as he read it. She was inside his life. She knew about Zara's library books. She'd noticed the blue folder that had been sitting on his couch, which meant she'd been to his place, which meant no. He reread it. The text was from last night, probably. She'd been at his apartment briefly, come by on her way home, noticed things about his life, and felt comfortable enough to text him this morning like they had some kind of routine. Marcus found both items exactly where Victoria said they were. Zara padded into the kitchen in pink socks and an oversized camp t-shirt. "Did Victoria text you?" she asked casually. His brain short-circuited. "Why would you ask that?" "Because she remembers stuff you forget," Zara said with the logic of children. "And she always knows what I need before I ask her." Marcus set the blue folder beside her backpack. "I don't forget that much." Zara gave him a look only children could manage. Equal parts doubt and affection. "You forgot my library book twice. Your teacher called me." "Because I told her to," Zara interrupted. "She asked me what I needed and I said my dad probably forgot to pack my book, so could she call him?" And she did. Victoria told me that's a good thing to do. Ask for help instead of just being upset about stuff. His daughter had a relationship with Victoria that he hadn't known about. Not romantic, not inappropriate, but real. Real in the way that meant Victoria had been present in Zara's life in ways he hadn't noticed. Real in ways that mattered. "Are you asking Victoria to come to the art fair Friday?" Zara asked, dragging her waffle through the syrup. Marcus reached for his coffee. "I don't know. You should. She said she wanted to see my city." Zara had been working on a cardboard city for 2 weeks, painting tiny houses, cutting crooked windows out of cereal boxes, constructing bridges from popsicle sticks. Victoria had seen the first sketches when she'd stopped by one evening with extra printer paper that Marcus had forgotten to buy. Everything was connected. All the little moments he'd thought were separate were actually strands of the same thing. At school drop-off, Zara unbuckled her seatbelt and leaned forward from the back seat. "Don't forget this time," she said. "Forget what?" "To ask Victoria. Before Friday." She was out of the car before he could respond, lifting her cardboard city carefully from the seat beside her, protecting it like it was something precious. Chapter 6. The power player intervenes. The office felt wrong when he walked in. At first, Marcus thought it was just him, his heightened awareness of Victoria, his constant peripheral checking to see if she was there, his careful avoidance of the 38th floor because facing her while they weren't talking felt impossible. But something actually was different. The atmosphere had shifted. There was a tension in the air that came from somewhere above, somewhere higher ranking, somewhere with more authority than the normal office politics allowed for. He found out why at 9 a.m. His supervisor called him into a small office and told him there was someone who wanted to speak with him. Not unusual. Sometimes clients asked about specific workers. Sometimes there were projects that required special expertise. But his supervisor looked nervous. The office was on the 39th floor, the executive level, the place where decisions got made about people like Marcus. Diane Voss occupied the largest office in the building. Floor-to-ceiling windows, original art. A desk that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of wood and was probably worth more than Marcus's annual salary. She didn't stand when he entered. She didn't ask him to sit. "You're the electrician," she said without preamble. "The one Victoria's been waiting for." Marcus's stomach did something complicated. Don't play dumb," Diane Voss interrupted. "I overheard a conversation. I'm very good at reading people, which is how I built a company from nothing. And I can read your situation clearly." She set down her coffee cup with precise control. "Victoria Bennett is the most talented systems architect I've ever worked with." She turned down 3 job offers in the past 2 years. From competitors, from better companies, from positions that would have paid significantly more money. She stayed here because she has a complicated emotional situation with an electrician who clearly doesn't have any idea what she's worth. The words landed like stones. She came to me after your little midnight conversation, Diane continued. She told me you made a joke proposal because you were exhausted, and then she told me she's been waiting 3 years for you to notice her. And then she told me she was going to go back to her life and see if you could actually step up. Diane leaned back in her chair. But here's what I actually think. I think you're a man who has no idea that he has something worth fighting for. I think you built a life so small that you don't even know what bigger looks like anymore. And I think Victoria, smart, talented, beautiful Victoria, might be about to waste the best years of her career on someone who isn't willing to risk anything. She locked eyes with him. So I'm going to make this very clear. Hartwell Analytics just made an offer to Victoria. $200,000 per year, lead systems architect, her own team, the job of her career. The offer expires in 48 hours. Marcus couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't do anything but understand that Victoria had never mentioned this. Victoria had been sitting on this information while Marcus was learning about her conditions and trying to figure out how to change now. Victoria's asked for time to think about it, Diane said, but I know why she's hesitating. Because she's stupid enough to be hoping you'll actually do something, and I'm stepping in because I don't hire people to waste their potential on men who aren't willing to step up. She stood and walked to the window, giving Marcus her back. So here's what's going to happen. You have 48 hours to figure out whether you're going to choose her. Clearly, not maybe, not eventually, not in a way where you're still keeping your options open. If you can do that, fine. You can try to build something with Victoria, but if you waste her time, if you tell her you're willing to change and then you go back to your small, safe, controlled life, I'm going to make sure she understands exactly what she gave up by staying for you. Diane turned back to face him. And I'm very good at making sure people understand things, Mr. Jenkins. The door was over there. The dismissal was clear. Marcus stood on shaky legs and walked toward it. One more thing, Diane called as he reached the door. If you hurt her, if you choose her and then you treat that choice like another problem to manage, I will personally make sure you regret it. He left without responding. In the elevator down, Marcus understood several things simultaneously. Victoria mattered to people. Victoria had options. Victoria was choosing to wait for him while her life passed by. Victoria's boss had just made it clear that patience had limits, and he had 48 hours to figure out whether he was worthy of her patience. Chapter 7. The ticking clock begins. He found Victoria in the break room at lunch. She was staring at a coffee that had long since gone cold, her expression somewhere between focused and broken. Marcus sat down across from her without asking permission. Diane told me, he said. Victoria didn't look surprised. I know she did. I could tell from your face when you walked onto this floor. Why didn't you tell me about Hartwell? Because, Victoria said quietly, I wanted to see if you would choose me without knowing what I was giving up. I wanted to know if you could choose me just because of me. Not because of pity or obligation, or because you felt like you owed me something. She finally looked at him. The job is real. The offer is real. 48 hours to decide is real. And I've already told Hartwell I need to think about it, which means every hour that passes, I'm closer to losing it forever. Marcus's throat was tight. Victoria, I need you to understand something, she said. And her voice was calm but weighted. I've been waiting for 3 years. 3 years of watching you keep your distance. 3 years of seeing you pick up your daughter and love her in ways that seemed to exclude everyone else. 3 years of understanding that you were terrified. She reached across the table and took his hand. It was the first time she'd voluntarily touched him. And the contact felt like electricity. I was patient because I believed in you, she continued. But patience has to end somewhere. And I can't spend the rest of my life in a break room with a man who isn't sure if he wants me. I can't watch you protect yourself by keeping me at arm's length. I can't be the woman you choose when it's safe and reject when it's complicated. Tears were forming in her eyes, but her voice remained steady. So here's what I need from you. I need clarity. Not eventually. Not when you get your life together. Not when you figure out how to make room for me. Now. I need you to decide if you're actually willing to build something real with me. And if you are, I need to see it, not in words, in action. She let go of his hand. I have 48 hours to accept Hartwell's offer. You have 48 hours to show me you're serious. And then we both make our choice, together or apart. But no more waiting, no more ambiguity, no more me standing on the edge of your life. She stood and walked away, leaving Marcus alone with the weight of the ultimatum and the knowledge that she wasn't bluffing. The clock was ticking. 48 hours. Part 3. Escalation. Multi-layer. Chapter 8. The night he understands his cage. Marcus picked up Zara from after-school care and told Mrs. Chen he might be late getting her the following day. He wasn't sure, but he might be. Mrs. Chen nodded with the understanding of someone who had watched Marcus navigate working-class life for 3 years. He and Zara got home just after 5 p.m. He made dinner. Spaghetti and sauce. Something simple and warm. Zara talked about school. About her friend Maddie, who had finally brought her hamster to show and tell. about the teacher who'd been impressed with the city project she was building. Marcus listened with the kind of attention he'd trained himself to give. After Rachel left, he'd learned that the work of single parenthood was less exhausting when he treated Zara's observations as seriously as she intended them, which was to say, as the most important things in the world. But his mind was elsewhere, spinning, terrified, understanding that he had made a choice years ago to live like love was a liability rather than an asset. After dinner, he put Zara to bed with the routine they'd established: bath time, story time, tucking in with the stuffed rabbit missing one ear, the rabbit that had been through everything with her, that had stayed while other people left. That was constant in a world of variables. He sat on the edge of her bed and looked at his daughter sleeping. Really looked at her. Zara's face was peaceful in sleep in a way it never was when she was awake and trying to be good. Trying to be the kind of daughter who understood that stability was fragile and could be broken if she wasn't careful. He had done that to her. Without ever saying it explicitly, he taught her that the safest life was the smallest life. That connection meant risk. That people leaving was the natural state of things. That love was something to be managed rather than experienced. He'd built a cage, and he'd put his daughter in it with him. Marcus left Zara's room and went to the kitchen. He poured himself a glass of water and looked out the window at the dark street, the quiet neighborhood, the life he'd constructed with such careful intention. It was a good life in many ways. Zara was safe. She was happy. She had a father who showed up every day and did the work and never left her wondering whether she mattered. But it was also a life built on fear. And fear was not actually a good foundation for anything. He thought about Victoria, waiting 3 years, watching him, understanding something about him that he hadn't understood about himself, asking him to be braver than he'd ever been. He thought about Rachel, who told him he lived like disappointment was always coming and he wanted credit for seeing it first. She'd been right. He'd been living his entire life as a preemptive strike against loss, building walls before anyone could demolish them, closing doors before anyone could leave, and it hadn't worked. Rachel had left anyway. The walls had just meant he was alone when she did. Marcus sat at his kitchen table at 2 a.m. and understood, with the clarity that only comes from complete exhaustion and complete honesty, that he couldn't keep living this way. That Zara couldn't keep growing up in a cage and call it safety. That Victoria was right. That love without risk wasn't love. It was management. And he was tired of managing. He pulled out his phone and composed a text to Victoria. "I need to talk to you, not tonight. Tomorrow I know what I want." He didn't send it, he deleted it. Words weren't enough. Words were what safe people used. Words were how you stayed in control. But he was done being safe. Chapter 9, Rachel Complication, Rachel Returns. The next morning, Marcus found a note taped to his apartment door. It was from Rachel, his ex-wife. The woman who'd left because he loved their daughter more than he loved her. The woman who'd tried to tell him that living like disappointment was always coming was not a sustainable way to build a life. The note said, "Ethan, we need to talk about the custody arrangement. I'm getting married, moving to Portland. Lily needs to understand this is happening. Call me." His hands were shaking as he read it. Ethan. Nobody called him Ethan anymore. Marcus was who he'd become. Ethan felt like a ghost, like someone from a previous lifetime. He read the note 3 times before the words actually settled into his brain. Rachel was getting married. Rachel was moving to Portland. Rachel was the ghost in the room that had haunted every relationship, every connection, every moment of intimacy he'd tried to build and then backed away from. She'd been the one who left. She'd been the reason he'd built the cage in the first place. He called her back while Zara was at school. "I'm happy for you," he said when she answered. And he meant it, which surprised him. "I'm happy you found someone. That you're building a life." Rachel sounded confused. "I was prepared for you to be difficult about this." "I'm not going to be difficult," Marcus said. "I'm going to make this as easy as possible. But I need to tell you something. I've met someone, a woman who's important to me, and I'm moving to Portland with Zara to be with her." The words sounded both impossible and inevitable. "Ethan..." "Not Ethan," he said quietly. "Marcus. My name is Marcus now, and I'm not calling to ask permission. I'm calling because I respect you, and I wanted you to hear it from me first." Rachel was quiet for a moment. Then, "Is she good to Zara?" It was such a Rachel question, so practical, so focused on what actually mattered. "Yes," Marcus said. "She is." "Then I'm happy for you too," Rachel replied. After they hung up, Marcus sat in his kitchen and understood that one complication had been solved. Rachel would support this. Rachel had been waiting for him to figure out that loving their daughter didn't mean excluding everyone else. She'd left so that he would have to learn this truth. She'd loved him in her way by refusing to stay. Chapter 10. Office pressure mounts. The office felt different when Marcus arrived. Victoria was at her desk, coffee, laptop, the same careful focus she always maintained, but there was something new, a distance, a professionalism that didn't include softness. She looked up once. Morning, that was all. She returned to her work. By lunch, Marcus understood what had happened. Victoria had decided. She'd moved on. She was protecting herself from the possibility of disappointment by stepping back into her role as simply a woman who worked here. She was choosing herself, in advance of him potentially choosing someone else. Mason Reed, one of the junior associates, cornered him in the break room. "So, what's the deal with you and Victoria?" he asked casually, dropping into the chair across from him. Marcus kept his eyes on the spreadsheet he wasn't really reading. "There is no deal." "That's exactly what I'm saying," Mason replied. "The whole office can tell something's off. You two have some kind of quiet breakup or what?" "There's nothing to break up," Marcus said. "We're just complicated." Mason laughed. "Man, I've never seen someone more obviously in love with someone else than Victoria is with you. But whatever, you look like you're about to ruin something important. So I'm just going to say don't. Please don't, because I watch good people make bad choices and it gets old." He left, leaving Marcus alone with the weight of being watched, of being seen as a threat to someone good, of understanding that his indecision wasn't private anymore. Chapter 11. Diane's second confrontation, the real stakes. At 3 p.m., Diane requested him in her office again. This time she invited him to sit. Progress of a sort. 24 hours, she said without preamble. That's how much time Victoria has to decide about Hartwell. She asked me for an extension on the original deadline. I gave her 1 extra day because I want to see what you'll do. Marcus said nothing. "She came to see me this morning," Diane continued. "She was crying, which I've never seen from her before. And she asked me to give you one more chance to prove that you're serious, that you actually understand what you're asking for." Diane leaned back in her chair. "So let me be very clear about what's actually happening here, because I think you're not understanding the stakes. Victoria has put her entire career on pause to see if you're worth it. That $200,000 job? That's freedom, that's options. That's the ability to build a life completely separate from anyone else's expectations." She paused, letting that land. She's holding that in her hands right now. And she's waiting to see if you can actually be different than you've been. Not someday, not eventually, now. Are you a man who changes, or are you a man who talks about changing and keeps the same life anyway? Marcus finally spoke. "I don't know how to change." "Exactly," Diane said with something like satisfaction. "That's honest. That's the first true thing you've said to me. So now you have 24 hours to figure it out. Not theoretically. Actually, if you're going to choose her, I need to see that you understand what that choice costs." She stood and walked to the window, offering him her back. "And Victoria? She's not waiting anymore. She's done waiting. So if you approach her with anything less than everything, she's going to take Hartwell. She's going to build a life without you. And she's going to be happy. Because Victoria's the kind of woman who succeeds at everything she does." She turned back to face him. "She'll be happy without you. That's what you need to understand. This isn't her last chance. It's your last chance. And if you waste it, don't come back here expecting me to feel sorry for you." Chapter 12. The Breaking Point. That evening, Marcus made 3 phone calls that changed his life. The first was to his business partner, Derek. Derek, who'd wanted to buy Marcus out for 2 years. Derek, who'd been waiting for Marcus to be ready to let go. "I want to sell," Marcus said. "All of it. Tomorrow, if possible." Derek didn't ask questions. Derek understood that something significant had shifted. They negotiated terms that were fair to both of them. Not fast money terms, but honest terms. Marcus would have enough to bridge the gap. Enough to take a lower-paying job while he figured things out. Enough to show Victoria that he wasn't just talking. The second call was to his landlord. 30-day notice. He was breaking the lease. He'd take the financial hit. He'd lose the security deposit. It didn't matter. The third call took the longest. He searched for Hartwell Analytics' Portland office. He found their facilities manager position, listed as open. Deadline approaching. He filled out the online application at 11:47 p.m., the exact time he'd asked Victoria to marry him. He attached his resume, his references, his proof of experience. He hit submit at midnight. Then he sat in his apartment in the dark and understood that he'd just blown up his entire life. He'd sold the business he'd spent 3 years building. He'd broken his lease. He'd applied for a job in another state. He'd made himself homeless and jobless and completely dependent on a woman accepting him. It was the most terrifying thing he'd ever done, and it was also the clearest thing he'd ever done. He wasn't asking for credit. He wasn't performing change. He was just doing what needed to be done, moving towards something instead of away from everything. At 6 a.m. his phone buzzed, a call from Hartwell. They wanted to interview him. Today, 2 p.m. Portland time, they could do it via video conference. At 10 a.m., Derek texted, "Papers are ready. You sure about this?" Marcus replied, "I'm sure." At noon, Marcus signed the papers that transferred ownership of Continue 1131, his business, to Derek. 20 years of work, gone. Or not gone. Transformed. Changed into something else. Something that gave him space to be someone different. He picked up Zara from school. He didn't tell her anything yet. He just picked her up and looked at his daughter and understood that he was doing this for her. So she could see that love wasn't a liability. So she could see that growth was possible. So she could see that choosing something bigger than fear was actually the bravest thing a person could do. Part 4. Breaking Point and Climax Build. Chapter 13. The Parking Lot Confrontation. At 6 a.m. the next morning, Marcus waited in the parking garage below Victoria's apartment building. He'd barely slept. He'd driven to Portland the night before after the Hartwell interview, which had gone well. So well that they'd asked him to come in person to meet the team. He'd found a motel. He'd waited for morning. Victoria's car appeared at 6:47 a.m. She was heading to work. She was heading to the office to deliver her decision to Diane, one way or another. Marcus stepped into her path. She stopped the car. She didn't look shocked. Something in her expression suggested she'd been waiting for this moment too. She opened the window. "What are you doing here?" "I needed to tell you something," Marcus said. "Not ask for credit, not ask you to wait, just tell you what I did." Victoria's expression remained neutral. Professional, self-protective. "I sold my business," Marcus continued. "I signed the papers yesterday. It's Derek's now. I don't have that income anymore." Victoria was very still. "I broke my lease," he continued. 30-day notice. "I'm moving." "Marcus, let me finish," he said. "Please." She closed her mouth. "I applied to Hartwell," he said, "yesterday. They interviewed me last night. They want to hire me. I'm going to Portland, not following you, joining you. I got the job offer this morning. I'm taking it." Tears started forming in Victoria's eyes, but she didn't speak. "I'm not asking you to come back to my life," Marcus said, and his voice roughened. "I'm asking you if I can come into yours. Not because you're my escape. Not because Zara needs a mother. Not because I love you so much I'll die if you leave. But because you're right, I've been building a cage and calling it a home. And I'm done." Victoria's hands gripped the steering wheel. "I understand if you're done waiting," Marcus continued. "I understand if you need to take Hartwell and build your life without me. But if you're willing, I want to do this differently. I want to build something with you. Not eventually. Now." Victoria looked at him for a long moment. Then she opened the car door and stepped out. "Did you do this for me?" she asked. "No," Marcus said. "I did this for me. For Zara. For the life I actually want instead of the life I was afraid of." "Do you understand what you're asking?" "Yes," Marcus said. "I'm asking you to trust that I've actually changed. Not that I will change. That I have." Victoria closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, some of the distance was gone. "Hartwell," she said quietly. "They're a good company. That's a good job." "It is," Marcus agreed. "My interview is today," Victoria said. "With Hartwell? They wanted to talk to me before I made my final decision. I was going to turn them down. But now—" She looked at him directly. "How much of this is because I was leaving?" Marcus didn't lie. "Some of it. Watching you pack your car made it real in a way thinking about it never did. But if I'm honest, I've been watching you shine for 3 years. The last thing in the world I would do is resent you for being brilliant. I resent myself for almost missing the chance to build something with you." Victoria's expression softened slightly. "You can't promise this will be easy." "No," Marcus said. "You can't promise Zara won't get hurt." "No. You can't promise we won't have terrible seasons or bad timing or real life getting in the way." "I know," Marcus said, "but I can promise I won't treat love like a problem to manage from a distance. I can promise I won't hide behind Zara when I'm scared. I can promise I'll actually let you in." Victoria stepped closer to him. She studied his face like she was trying to verify something, like she was checking to see if this was real. "If we do this," she said slowly, "we do it honestly. No disappearing into your head. No using Zara as a shield when what you really mean is that you're afraid. And I'm not standing on the edge of your life anymore." "You won't have to," Marcus said. Victoria's expression cracked. She kissed him then. And it wasn't soft or gentle. It was a kiss that carried years of waiting. The weight of a decision made. The overwhelming relief of truth finally spoken in full. When they pulled apart, Victoria rested her forehead against his chest. "My interview is at 9 a.m., she said. "But Marcus, there's something I need to tell you first. Something Diane told me about you." Chapter 14. The Moment of Choice. They went to a coffee shop and sat in a corner booth where they could talk without being overheard. Victoria explained. Diane had done a background check. She'd learned about Rachel, about the divorce, about Marcus's previous life in Pittsburgh. She'd learned about the structural engineering career, the 2 patents, the brilliant work he'd done before walking away from everything. "She told me because she wanted me to know that you're capable of more than maintenance work," Victoria said, "that you've walked away from things before. But not because you couldn't do them, because they didn't matter more than what you were protecting." Marcus listened to this information about himself. It was true. He had been brilliant once. He had done work that mattered, and he had walked away because a child in a marriage mattered more. Then he'd let fear convince him that protecting what mattered meant making it small. "The Hartwell job," Victoria continued, It's not just facilities management. They have a systems integration team. Diane recommended you for that position. They want someone who understands both the mechanical systems and the architectural design, someone who can bridge those worlds. She reached across the table and took his hand. You don't have to take it, she said. You could take the facilities job. You could take any job. But Diane believed you were capable of doing the work you actually trained for. She believed in you. Marcus understood in that moment that his antagonist had never been his antagonist. Diane had been trying to protect Victoria while also seeing Marcus for what he actually was. A capable man who'd convinced himself he wasn't capable of anything more than survival. When are you going to tell Zara? Victoria asked. I have to tell her today, Marcus said. She deserves to know what's happening to her life. No protecting her from reality, telling her the truth. Victoria nodded. What are you going to say? That her dad made some decisions, Marcus said slowly, thinking through it as he spoke. That we're moving to Portland, that you're going to be part of our life, that it's going to be different than the way things are now. But that different might actually be better. Victoria smiled. That's honest. She's going to ask if we're getting married, Marcus said. Are we? Victoria asked, and there was something like humor in her voice. After a grand parking lot confession? Eventually, Marcus said, if you want to. But not because I proposed as a joke, because we actually choose it, together. Okay, Victoria said, then eventually we will. Chapter 15. Legal and social complication. The real crisis. Everything was happening at once. Marcus picked up Zara from school. He told her they were taking a drive. He explained, as honestly as an adult can explain to an 8-year-old, that some things in her life were about to change. Zara listened with the focused attention of a child who understood that this was important. Victoria and I are going to try building a life together, Marcus explained. That means moving to Portland. That means Victoria will be part of our family. That means change. Are you getting married? Zara asked, which was exactly what Marcus had predicted. Maybe, Marcus said. Someday, if Victoria wants to. Zara seemed satisfied with this answer. When they got home, Marcus was unpacking boxes, getting ready to start the move that would happen over the next few weeks. He was thinking about the logistics of transferring Zara's school, about timing and custody arrangements with Rachel. His phone rang. It was Rachel, but she wasn't calling about Portland or custody or logistics. She was calling about something else entirely. Marcus, I need to talk to you about something, she said, and her voice was tight with anger that didn't quite fit. I got a call from Linda. You remember Linda? The woman you dated for 4 months? She told me that you're planning to move across the country with Zara without giving me proper notice. Marcus's stomach dropped. Rachel, we talked about this. We talked about you telling me, Rachel said. We didn't talk about you just deciding to uproot our daughter because you're involved with some woman. It's not like that. Linda told me this woman is your boss, Rachel continued. That's a conflict of interest. Marcus, that's the kind of thing that looks unstable. That looks like you're making decisions with your emotions instead of your head. Marcus understood what was happening. Linda had called Rachel. Linda, who'd left because Marcus hadn't made room for her, who'd probably been harboring resentment for years, had decided to weaponize information against him. I'm talking to my lawyer, Rachel said. I'm exploring my options regarding custody modification. I want to understand what legal grounds I have to protect Zara from an unstable parenting situation. Then she hung up. Marcus sat down very hard on his kitchen chair. He'd been so focused on Victoria, on understanding what he actually wanted, on making the choice, that he hadn't anticipated this. He hadn't understood that opening his life to something bigger would mean exposing himself to someone who could use the old Marcus against the new Marcus. He called his lawyer. Sarah, a woman who'd handled the original custody arrangement with Rachel. He explained the situation. This is a frivolous claim, Sarah said after listening to the details. But it will slow things down. If you move before this is resolved, it could be interpreted as abandonment. You need to stay in state, at least until we can get this resolved. Marcus looked at the boxes he'd been packing, the plans he'd made, the future he'd agreed to build with Victoria, and he understood. Fear was still there, still trying to convince him that the safest choice was the small choice, that he should put the move on hold, that he should tell Victoria he wasn't sure, that he should go back to protecting himself instead of opening up to her. Chapter 16, The Moment of Doubt. He didn't call Victoria immediately. He sat with the fear for a few hours. He sat with the understanding that Rachel could actually complicate this, that Linda could poison things, that opening his life could be weaponized against him. At 8 p.m. he called Victoria. He told her everything. He didn't minimize it. He didn't try to make it sound smaller than it was. He explained that Rachel's lawyer could file a custody modification claim, that it would probably go nowhere, but it could slow things down, that he might need to stay in the state for a while before the move happened. He waited for Victoria to pull back. Instead, she said, "You need to stay. You need to be here when Rachel's lawyer files. You need to show the court that you're stable, present, fighting for what matters. But Portland can wait a few months," Victoria said. This is important, Marcus. Zara needs you to be present during this. You need to be present. He heard it, though, the slight change in her voice, the cost of understanding, being tired of waiting. Again. Victoria, he said, I need to be honest. I'm scared. I'm scared that if I tell you to wait, you're going to decide you're done waiting. That you're going to take Hartwell and build a life without me. I'm not going to do that, Victoria said quietly. But I'm scared of asking you to wait anyway. I know, Victoria replied. So here's what's going to happen. You're not using fear as an excuse to step back. You're going to deal with the legal stuff. You're going to stay present with Zara, and I'm going to be here, figuring out Portland from this end. And when the time is right, we're both moving. But we're doing it honestly. We're not letting fear make the decision. What if you change your mind? Marcus asked. I won't, Victoria said, but Marcus, I need you to stop using protection as an excuse. Your daughter needs a father who chooses growth even when it's scary, not a father who steps back from love because fear whispered in his ear. After they hung up, Marcus understood something essential. Victoria was not going to rescue him from his own fear. She was not going to make this easy. She was not going to step in and provide the safe option. She was going to demand that he be brave. And that was exactly what he needed. Part 5. Climax and Justice. Chapter 17. The Reversal. Diane steps in Monday morning. Rachel's lawyer was supposed to file the custody modification paperwork. Marcus woke up thinking about it. He'd hired Sarah, who was good, who was smart, who understood family law. But he also knew that even a frivolous claim would complicate things. It would delay Portland. It would drag Zara through court proceedings. It would make everything harder. At 8:47 a.m., his phone rang. Unknown number. It was Diane's lawyer. Mr. Jenkins, this is Robert Chen, counsel for Diane Voss. I'm calling to offer you legal representation at no cost. Ms. Voss is prepared to provide her legal team to handle your custody matter. Marcus didn't understand. Why would she do that? Because, Robert said, Ms. Voss believes in people who actually change. She's been monitoring your situation. She knows about the custody threat. She's prepared to support you through this process. Robert explained what Diane's team would do. They would be ready to oppose the filing immediately. They would show it was frivolous and retaliatory. They would provide documentation of Marcus's character, his capability as a parent, his fitness as a human being. More importantly, they would make sure the court understood that filing a custody modification as retaliation for personal reasons had consequences. At 9 a.m., Robert continued, Rachel's lawyer will call you. You're going to tell them that you're now represented by counsel. You're going to tell them to direct all communication through our office. You're not going to discuss this matter directly anymore. Marcus followed these instructions precisely. When Rachel's lawyer called at 9:15, Marcus calmly explained that he was represented by Robert Chen and Diane Voss's legal team. He provided the office number. He said nothing else. By noon, the cease and desist letter had been delivered to Rachel's lawyer. It outlined, in precise legal language, that any custody modification filing based on retaliation would result in counterfiling and documentation of harassment. By 2 p.m., Rachel called Marcus directly. I'm withdrawing the filing, she said. She sounded small, ashamed, like someone who'd been caught doing something wrong. Rachel! I was angry, she said. Linda got in my head. But looking at the legal stuff Diane's people sent, I know this is frivolous. I know you're building something real. I'm sorry. Marcus felt something heavy lift from his chest. Thank you for being willing to listen, he said. Thank you for showing up for Zara, Rachel replied. That's what matters. I want her to have that. After they hung up, Marcus called Victoria. It's resolved, he said. Rachel withdrew the filing. Diane stepped in and made sure it didn't become a thing. Victoria started crying. She believed in you, she said. She believed in us, Marcus replied. She was protecting both of us. Chapter 18, the interview and the reveal. The interview with Hartwell happened exactly as planned. Marcus went through the formal process. He met the team. He discussed the systems integration role. He explained his background in structural engineering. He talked about how maintenance work had taught him to bridge worlds, to understand both mechanical systems and architectural design. The interview went well. It went so well that they offered him the job on the spot. Not the facilities management position, but the systems integration role. Senior position, real pay, work that actually used his training. When Victoria had her interview later that day, she was offered the lead architect position, head of a new project team, the job she'd been waiting for, the job that would require she stay in Portland for at least 3 years. That evening they met in person, both in Portland, both celebrating, both understanding that they were building something real. Diane called me, Victoria said. After the interview, she told me what she did for you, the legal support, the backing with the interview team. She was protecting both of us, Marcus replied. No, Victoria said. She was believing in you. She said something that I want to tell you. I believe in people who actually change. I believe in people who are willing to risk everything for what matters. And I believe in the woman smart enough to wait for a man like that to figure it out. Marcus felt the weight of Diane's belief settle on him. She'd been his antagonist, and now she was his ally. She'd tested him and found him worthy. She'd removed obstacles and made space for him to build something real. Part 6. Resolution. Chapter 21. 6 months later. Marcus Jenkins now held the position of Senior Systems Integration Specialist at Hartwell Analytics. He oversaw the coordination between mechanical systems and architectural design for the company's major projects. He made $95,000 per year with full benefits, something he'd never had as an independent contractor. More importantly, he worked on problems that actually mattered, problems that used the training he'd abandoned years ago. Victoria had built her team of 5 architects. She'd designed 3 new building systems that were ahead of schedule and under budget. She'd mentored 2 junior architects who were already talking about how she'd changed their understanding of what was possible in their field. Zara was thriving in her new school. She'd made friends. She'd joined the chess club. She'd asked Victoria to teach her how to code because, she explained, if you can tell buildings how to work, maybe I can tell computers how to work. Rachel called every Sunday to video chat. She was happy. She was building a life with her new husband. She'd visited Portland twice. And Zara had gone to Atlanta once. They were figuring out how to be family across distance. And it was working. Diane had invited Marcus and Victoria to dinner at her house. She'd shown them her private art collection. She'd told them that she was stepping back from the CEO role in a few years, that she was thinking about what she wanted to build next. I have a theory, she'd said over dessert. Sometimes you can't help people. You can only believe in them and get out of the way. Marcus understood that she was talking about him, that she'd been the catalyst that had forced him to understand what Victoria had been saying all along, that small lives are not safe lives, that cages are not homes, that love without risk is just management. Chapter 22. The meaning. One evening, Marcus went back to the building. Not to work, he didn't need to. He just needed to stand in the place where everything had shifted. He took the elevator to the 38th floor. The conference room where Victoria had been rebuilding a presentation at midnight, where he'd made a joke that wasn't really a joke, where she told him she'd been waiting for years. The room was empty now, just a space with windows and a table and the memory of a moment that had changed everything. Marcus thought about what he'd learned from this. He'd learned that fear doesn't protect you. It just isolates you. He'd learned that loving someone well meant being willing to be vulnerable. He'd learned that the smallest lives are actually the most dangerous because they're the most fragile. A life built on control can shatter the moment control is lost. He'd learned that Diane's power had never been the problem. Her power had been the solution. She'd been testing him to see if he was worthy of Victoria. She'd been seeing if he could be different than he'd been. And when he'd finally proven he could change, she'd removed every obstacle in his way. He'd learned that Victoria's patience wasn't weakness, it was wisdom. It was the knowledge that some people are worth waiting for, and the strength to know when waiting had to end. He'd learned that Zara had been watching him the whole time, learning from him how to be, understanding from his example what was possible. And when he'd finally stepped out of the cage, she'd stepped out too. She was braver now, more willing to try things, more open to connection. He'd learned that Rachel had loved him by leaving, by refusing to stay in a small space, by choosing herself, by making him confront the fact that love couldn't be managed from a distance. And most importantly, he'd learned that the man he was trying to become was actually the man he'd always been. Underneath the fear. The structural engineer who understood how buildings work. The single father who loved his daughter. The man Victoria had seen from the beginning. He just needed to believe in himself enough to step into it. Chapter 23. Epilogue. The marriage. The wedding was small and perfect. They held it in a garden in Portland under trees that had been growing for 50 years. Victoria's mother came from Sacramento. Rachel came from Atlanta and brought her new husband. Diane came alone and sat in the front row like a testament to the integrity of the man standing at the altar. Mason came, which surprised Marcus, but maybe shouldn't have. Mason understood that this was a rare thing. A woman who'd seen clearly. A man who'd finally chosen growth over safety. A story with a real ending instead of just an extended pause. Zara was the flower girl, and she spent the entire ceremony grinning. She was 8.5 years old. Old enough to understand what was happening. Old enough to understand that this was significant. Old enough to understand that her father was choosing something bigger than he had before. When Marcus saw Victoria coming down the aisle, everything else faded away. She was beautiful in the white dress. But more than that, she was present. She was real. She was the woman who'd been patient enough to wait. And brave enough to set boundaries. She was the woman who'd believed in him before he believed in himself. The ceremony was simple. They'd written their own vows. Marcus spoke first. I'm standing here because you refused to let me hide. You saw me when I was trying to be invisible. You waited when you could have left. You set boundaries when you could have accepted less. You are the reason I understand that love is not management. It's presence. It's showing up every day and choosing each other. I'm going to spend the rest of my life doing that. Choosing you. Choosing us. Choosing growth even when it's scary. Victoria's voice was steady. I'm standing here because I saw something in you worth waiting for. I saw a man so afraid of loss that he'd chosen to lose everything preemptively. I saw someone who loved his daughter so much he was caging her. I saw someone capable of more than survival. And I waited because I believed that the man inside the fear was worth believing in. She paused, her eyes shining. You came back, you changed, you chose me. And now we're building something real, something honest, something that includes Zara, that includes our careers, that includes the full complexity of our actual lives. This is what I was waiting for. Not a perfect man, a real man, a man willing to be honest, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life building this with you. When they kissed, the small crowd applauded. Later at the reception, Marcus danced with his daughter. Zara rested her head against his chest. She was getting taller, less of a small child each day. Are you happy, Dad? She asked. I'm very happy, Marcus said. Are you? I like Portland, Zara said. I like the school, I like Victoria. She teaches me cool stuff. I'm glad, Marcus said. Mom's happy too, Zara continued. She likes her new husband. And she says you seem different, less worried all the time. Marcus understood that his daughter had been observing him, learning from him, understanding from his example what was possible. And now that he'd stepped out of the cage, she was stepping out too. She was braver, more willing to try things, more open to connection. He'd changed his own life by learning to be present, and in doing so, he'd changed his daughter's life too. Later, when Zara was with Victoria's mother, Marcus found himself in a quiet corner with Diane. Thank you, he said simply. For what? Diane asked. For believing in me, for testing me, for getting out of the way when I finally figured it out. Diane smiled. I believed in Victoria. I was just making sure you were worth her patience. Was I? Marcus asked. You are now, Diane replied. That's what matters. Not who you were, but who you became. She excused herself to dance with Rachel. Of all people. And Marcus understood that grace and second chances and people believing in each other were more powerful than fear. He watched his new wife across the room laughing with her friends. He watched his daughter sleeping in a chair in her flower girl dress. He watched the people who'd been part of this journey. Diane, Rachel, Mason, Victoria's team, his own colleagues, all of them had believed in him in some way. All of them had been part of the story that had brought him to this moment. He'd come to Portland as a man trying to escape his past. He was leaving it as a man building his future. The cage was gone. The wall was gone. The life he thought he had to live was gone. And in its place was something real.